This is the penultimate video in this series. That means it's the second to last one. Chapter 18. Beep, 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 beep. The old army jeep zoomed around the corner and towards the library. A load of pampas stalks bounced around in the back of the jeep. "Would you look at that?" cried Boss. "It's Agnes Lou." "And Rosie," said Ada. She and Iggy ran to the jeep. "Rosie," they said, "what's going on?" Rosie flipped open the glove box and Gizmo hopped out. She chirped happily and flew to the top of the canvas. "June needed lighter brushes," said Rosie. "So I asked Mrs. Lou if we could use one of the pampas stalks from her garden. She cut them all down." Mrs. Lou and Rosie jumped out of the jeep and grabbed a bunch of plumes from the back. "Agnes Lou," said Aunt Rose, "what have you done to your beautiful garden?" "Doesn't matter," said Mrs. Lou. "When a riveter needs something, I do my part. June needs these more than I do." She pulled a pair of shears from her pocket for cutting and trimmed one of the stalks. "They're lighter than those curtain rods." Mrs. Lou, though I would have tried curtain rods too. "It was a good design, Rosie." Rosie looked confused. "You design things?" she asked. Mrs. Lou laughed. "Well, of course I do. I'm an engineer too, and we engineers have to help each other. That's why I left the bucket of tubes and tape out for you." She left those out there. Rosie thought those had come from Ada and Iggy, or the recyclers, or Bee or Bo. She had so many questions, but no time to ask. Aunt Rose and the Riveters crowded in to give Mrs. Lou hugs. They all knew her. "Your poor garden," said June. "What were you thinking?" Mrs. Lou raised her hand. "Not another word. It's time to paint." Mrs. Lou handed Rosie a stalk and Rosie got busy. Within moments, June was painting again. You see, because the pampas stalks were much lighter than the curtain rods, so she could keep her arms up for longer. Within moments, June was painting again, and she swished the brushes this way and that. It was beautiful. Then snap, the red stem broke. "Uh-oh," thought Rosie. "Don't worry, that's why we bought extras," said Mrs. Lou. Chapter 19. Rosie swapped in a new stalk, and June kept painting. After a few minutes, the blue stem snapped, but Rosie was ready with a replacement. As other stems broke, Rosie swapped them too. Meanwhile, Rosie, Ada, and Iggy learned more about the mysterious Mrs. Lou. Boss explained that Mrs. Lou was a riveter in a jeep factory on the other side of the river from the aeroplane factory. "I made this very jeep." A jeep is a car, but it can go over rough ground and things. "I made this very jeep," said Mrs. Lou. "I learned a lot about machines during the war. It made me want to invent some, so I did. Haven't stopped since." Rosie was amazed. All this time she had lived next door to another engineer, and she hadn't known it. See, you've got to talk to people. People are interesting. You don't know about people until you talk to them. Mrs. Lou seemed to read her mind. "You didn't know because I rarely get out of the house except at night. I have a skin condition which makes me allergic to the sunlight. It's why I wear this crazy big hat. Can't let the sun hit me." "Is that why you keep your curtains shut?" said Rosie. So Rosie had totally misunderstood and thought she was just mean, but actually she was allergic to the sunshine. Imagine being allergic to the sunshine. "Yes," Mrs. Lou said, "that's why I keep my curtains shut. But your Aunt Rose lets me know when you've got a project, and I donate all I can to help. I'm glad you like the crates that I leave at your house." "You do that?" asked Rosie. "Of course. Didn't you think it was the tooth fairy?" "Oh, more like the tool fairy," said Aunt Rose. "Oh, that's a good one." Aunt Rose slapped her knee and laughed out loud, and she laughed until she wheezed and her eyes filled with tears. Soon the whole group was laughing. No one laughed harder than Mrs. Lou. Rosie realized that she had been very wrong about Mrs. Lou. She thought Mrs. Lou was mean and mysterious, and she didn't like her. She should have spoken to Mrs. Lou and given her a chance. "You know, Rosie," she said, "I could use your help with a doohickey I made to scrub the dishes. It's simply smashing." Oh, I think it keeps smashing the dishes, when you wash your plates. "No, it sounds amazing," says Rosie. "No," said Mrs. Lou, "it is simply smashing all my plates, and now I'm almost out of bowls." That's funny, because you can say something smashing, it means it's amazing. Well, that's a smashing picture. But actually, you can smash things or break them. She laughed again, and Rosie laughed too. "I'd love to help," said Rosie. "It's good to have an engineer for a neighbour," said Mrs. Lou. Rosie smiled back. "Yes, indeed." Mrs. Lou does look very strange in that big hat and coat, but it's because she's allergic to the sunlight. Just because when people get old, don't assume that they haven't got interesting stories to tell, an interesting history. That means what they were like as a child or a teenager or a young adult.